You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered 2025. Here we are, approaching the 16th month of this genocide. Things haven't changed. We've seen on the ground some of the prisoners released, Palestinian and Israeli, and we welcome this. We want everyone to go home. Nobody should be held hostage or captive, irrespective of who they are. What we need to see is a liberated Palestine that sees everybody free. What is often missed in the conversation is the fact that 2 million Palestinians that are held inside what can only be termed as the concentration camp that is Gaza, that those 2 million people are all hostages. The vision we have seen is proof positive of the complete and absolute abject failure of Benjamin Netanyahu, his government, his Knesset, Zionism, Israel, in everything they endeavored to achieve. At the start of the war, this was about ending Hamas, destroying Hamas completely. The vision we've seen is Hamas appears to be unchanged, perhaps degraded militarily, but they are still there in their thousands with weapons and still control Gaza in its entirety. The general's plan, which was last week uplifted by Donald Trump, the general's plan, which was to get Egypt and Jordan to take Palestinians, has been completely vanquished. Palestinians we saw in their tens, their thousands, their hundreds of thousands perhaps, streaming north to houses they know don't exist, to homes they know don't exist, to schools and hospitals and infrastructure that Israel has reduced to rubble. The Palestinians, they walked home, rode home, found a way to get home. I saw vision of sons carrying mothers and sons carrying fathers. They are going home because they will not be ethnically cleansed. They will not and won't suffer the fate of 1948. They are a powerful reminder of the irrepressibility of the Palestinian spirit, abandoned by most of the world but unconquered and unbroken. A reminder to all people of the unbreakable connection of an indigenous people to their lands. And this is proof that indigenous connection is greater than any military power. It's proof in Palestine as the Palestinians marched with purpose to the north of Gaza and, inshallah, God willing, one day to their homes inside Palestine. We also saw those same scenes in Lebanon. with Lebanese marching south. And these images should dismiss once and for all the Zionist lie that Palestinians chose to leave in 1948. The Palestinians decided to leave of their own volition, and be clear that Palestinians in 1948 left at the end of a bayonet, left massacres because they wanted to live. Israel ethnically cleansed Palestine in 1948. It endeavoured to ethnically cleanse Gaza in 2023 with the General's Plan, and it has failed. We will never forget, and we shall return. It's clear now with the images that we've seen just the past couple of weeks of the Israeli prisoners being released that This was never about, quote unquote, the hostages. Hamas offered the return of all of the hostages on October 9 and 10. Israel could have had 100% of its prisoners returned within days. It didn't need to be 16 months. But Israel was never about the hostages. This was never about the hostages or prisoners. This was always about boosting Benjamin Netanyahu's domestic polling. It was always about destroying Gaza and making it uninhabitable. It was always about vanquishing Palestine. But they failed, and they failed miserably. You know, there isn't anyone that can't see what's happening in Gaza. And as much as our heart breaks for the pain and suffering, you cannot break these people. You can't look at it and see the humanity and not understand that they will rise again. And Palestinians and Palestine has been occupied many times in the millennia that the Holy Land has been inhabited by Palestinian people, by the indigenous people of that land. They have come and gone, and these Palestinians are proof positive of that spirit, that they will never be broken. The beauty, the absolute beauty of humanity, and an understanding and a belief that we will rise again, that Palestine will rise again. I saw some wonderful footage of Palestinians cleaning their homes. I mean, you know, entire walls missing, no windows, and they're sweeping and making do with what they can do. They were painting somehow, you know, had some paint, repairing some of the walls. There is impossible for these people to be conquered. And the sooner that Israel and Zionism and the West realizes that occupation creates resistance, that is the normal human condition. The normal human condition isn't to be occupied. It isn't to just acquiesce to somebody coming, taking your home. When somebody comes and takes you home, it is the normal human condition to resist that. And Palestinians will resist. They will resist until they are free from the river to the sea. We've done a couple of media interviews of late for international TV services. Unfortunately, local TV networks are not interested in what's happening in Palestine. They're not interested in the ongoing genocide. They're not interested in what's happening in the West Bank, in Lebanon. They're only interested in the horrific rise in anti-Semitism, and we should be right, we should be clear to condemn. There is no room for this hate. There's no room for targeting synagogues and childcare centres. And, you know, if you've got a caravan full of bombs and TNT, they should face the full extent of the law. I'd like to hear more from our Prime Minister with respect to these overseas actors. In fact, who is it doing? I'd like an apology from the mainstream media for any number of things. I mean, we're still waiting for the apology about the beheaded babies. We're still waiting for the apology that the command and control centres were underneath hospitals, and the genocide that was allowed to happen because the newspapers and the news services manufactured consent for this genocide to occur by perpetuating Zionist lies and Zionist narrative and Israeli lies. We need an apology for that, but we also need an apology for this shameful blaming of the rise in anti-Semitism on the Palestinian movement for justice and liberation. I've been very clear, and I've been all over the continent saying the same thing, and I've heard it said by so many others. The fight for Palestine is an anti-colonial, anti-racist struggle. Anti-colonial, anti-racist struggle. And that if you've got any hate in your heart, then you do not belong in our movement, in our rally, however that hate manifests itself, whether it's Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, misogyny, patriarchy, whatever that might look like. If you cannot see that every human being is as precious and as equal as each other, then you don't belong. And the fight for Palestine is a fight for justice for all oppressed people, whomever they are, however they identify, and wherever they might be. I won't hold my breath, of course. I don't expect them to be coming forward and apologising, but it's shameful that those lies are still on record, that people like Piers Morgan teared up about reports of 40 beheaded babies, and the invective and anger that was directed at any advocate for Palestine, demanding that we explain or justify or condemn. Where is your condemnation of the war crimes? Where is your reportage as to the 200 plus reporters that have been assassinated by Israel? Where is your reportage of the positive obligations Australia has with respect to the ICC warrants, the International Criminal Court warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and for Yoav Gallant? Where is your outrage and advocacy for the International Court of Justice ruling on plausible genocide, or the International Court of Justice determination in July on the entirety of Israel's occupation project and settlement project in West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza, in the Palestinian territory as is defined by international law? Where is your advocacy around that? Instead, we are asked, when are we going to stop protesting so people can go back to shopping? We are asked why we are so hateful. We are asked, do we understand why Australian citizens are concerned by suffering of Israelis? The reality is every human being suffers equally. There is no hierarchy of suffering. What there is, though, in a racist colony, in racist mainstream media, is a hierarchy of humanity. And the fact is, and we see it in all of the reportage, every name and backstory, every family that's interviewed of an Israeli prisoner, but nothing for the Palestinians. We've seen a couple of hundred Palestinians released, but already more than 60, close to 100 Palestinians have been redetained. We've seen Israeli snipers shooting at people that are rushing to the bus to greet their family members. What we've seen is 24 Palestinians killed in the West Bank, in Jenin and Tulkarm, since, quote-unquote, the ceasefire. What we do know about Israel is that they don't want a ceasefire. They want Palestinians to cease resistance while they continue to fire upon the Palestinians. I'm going to talk about the ceasefire and the history of ceasefires and how Israel sees and treats ceasefires. Some work that Zachary Foster did, Dr. Zachary Foster. He was on our show a couple of years ago and he's continued his great work as an anti-Zionist Jewish man. But first, let me just finish on the prisoners. What we do know is that Israel doesn't run quote-unquote prisons for criminals. What they run are torture camps. B'Tselem, Israel's leading human rights organization, B'Tselem, an organization that the State Department of the United States defers to for the situation of human rights in Israel-Palestine. B'Tselem released a report called Welcome to Hell, the Israeli Prison System as a Network of Torture Camps. What we have heard from the prisoners that have been released to date is stories of being starved, being denied medical treatment, they're overcrowded, there's no sanitation. It's just beyond shocking. The minister in charge of prisons is Ben-Gvir. He's the Minister for National Security. This is a guy that Israel has convicted. Israel's convicted for terrorism. We have heard the testimonies. We've seen the harrowing images of emaciated Palestinian bodies, of men with such gaunt faces and shock and horror. You can see the trauma and the beatings in them. If these were Israeli prisoners being returned, the condemnation would be all over every front page. People like myself would be called in, would get an opportunity for an interview, but the interview would be entirely focused around, this is your fault, look what you've done to these poor people. But as Palestinians, our humanity is denied, nobody speaks to it, nobody cares in the West. So we have the stories of Khalida Jarrar, who was held for almost 2 years under administrative detention. No charges, no evidence, never got to see a lawyer. For 6 months she sat in solitary confinement in a room that didn't allow her to fully stretch. She would lie on the floor to get fresh air from a crack under the door. Just imagine that, for 6 months in solitary confinement to get fresh air, she's lying on a cold concrete floor trying to breathe fresh air underneath the crack in the door. So much so that she lost her voice. We think about Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who in late December, 27th of December, the military raided Kamal Adwan Hospital in Bethlehem. And you will all remember the images of him walking across an apocalyptic landscape into the back of a tank. Nobody's heard from him since the 27th of December. So that's now 5.5 weeks. Nobody's heard from him. His family hasn't heard from him. He's had no legal contact. This is a man who was in charge of a hospital, a surgeon, a humanitarian, nothing. But it doesn't make our mainstream media. Nobody's talking about Palestinians, about our suffering. We're just not human enough. And so I'd urge each of you, make sure you're following all of the appropriate channels, wherever it might be, this radio show, this radio station, APAN, apan.org.au, but also all of the social medias. Get out and get loud and get proud for Palestine, however that might look. Wear your keffiyeh, wear your flag pin, wear your Palestine lanyard, a watermelon pin, perhaps even an olive pin, whatever it might be to represent Palestine. Speak to your friends. The best thing you can do is advocate in your own networks, in the spaces you inhabit, where you have the opportunity to influence family and friends, and speak to them about the humanity of Palestine and the injustice that's occurring. We need everyone fighting for Palestine together.
Stay locked to 3CR.
Because the Palestinian fight isn't just the Palestinians' fight, it's all our fight, because it's a fight not just about land, it's about a fight for freedom.
Everybody should be standing here today saying, Free Palestine.
Solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters on behalf of the Gumbaynja Nation, my people who've never ceded their sovereignty.
We should be recognising Palestine as a state and recognising the rights of Palestinians.
3CR. Stay tuned, stay radical.
Let's get back to ceasefires and talk about the reality of what a ceasefire looks like for a Palestinian and how Israel treats ceasefires. There have been at least 6 ceasefire agreements in 2008, 2012, 2014, 19 and 2021. And each case followed a similar trajectory. Hamas by and large observed the agreement. Israel by and large did not. Eventually, Israeli violence elicits some sort of response from Hamas. The world condemns Hamas. Israel launches another violent campaign. Let's go back to the first one. In 2006-07, Israel decided to tighten the siege on the Palestinian enclave there because the Palestinians did the wrong thing and elected somebody democratically, and what the Carter Peace Center said were free, fair and open elections amongst the freest and fairest they'd ever supervised. Hamas was elected and Israel decided to punish the enclave for electing the wrong party. The goal of Israel's blockade was to put Gaza on the brink of collapse and to put Palestinians on a diet. This was Dov Weissglass, advisor to then Israeli Prime Minister Olmert. Between 2006 and 2008, Israel killed almost 1,200 Palestinians and over 200 children. Then came a ceasefire, and Amnesty said it was the single most important factor in reducing civilian casualties. Between June and November of 2008, Hamas fired 0 rockets and restrained other groups from doing so. This is according to Mark Regev, former Australian-Israeli spokesperson, ambassador, and all-round genocide apologist. Immediately after the deal was signed, Israel announced it would not open the borders or ease the blockade until Hamas released Israeli soldier Shalit. On top of that, were November elections in the US. Israel broke the ceasefire and invaded Gaza, killing Palestinians on that presidential election day, hoping no one would notice. This elicited a response from the resistance, who sent some rockets into occupied Palestine, and that then became the reason for a full-blown war 2 months later, where Israel unleashed its terror, killing 1,400, 1,000 civilians, 300 children. A UN fact-finding report, known as the Goldstone Report, concluded in 400 pages that Israel's wartime aim was to punish, humiliate, and terrorize a civilian population in Gaza. Remember, this is 15 years ago. No change, no intervention from the West. The 2008-9 war never ended. Israel declared a ceasefire but didn't withdraw troops, didn't lift the blockade, didn't lift the siege, just kept hostilities on low boil. In 2012, ceasefire negotiations were all concluded. Hamas was about to sign off, but Israel didn't want that. Ahmed Jabri, one of the 3 people in charge of the Hamas political bureau, was due to hand over that ceasefire proposal. Instead, at 4 o'clock on November 12, Israel chose to not receive the ceasefire offer, but instead to assassinate Ahmed Jabri. And this transformed a ceasefire opportunity into a bloodbath known as Operation Pillar of Defense, in which Israel killed again another 171 Palestinians, mostly civilian. Another round of mowing the lawn, as Israel says when they take Palestinian life, and it's likened to mowing overgrown weeds of grass. Another ceasefire agreement in November of 2012. Just like the other ceasefire agreements, this one called for opening of border crossings to allow more aid in, facilitating movement of people and transfer of goods. Of course, Israel didn't abide by it. Within days, Israel was shooting people and dropping bombs. Israel doesn't abide by these agreements. It has to be clear. People must know that this is not and never is about Palestinians, quote unquote, keeping the peace. This is about Israel as a settler colony wanting to destroy, vanquish the indigenous people. Israel wants all of the Palestinian geography with as little Palestinian demography as possible, all the land with as few people as possible. It continued to violate the ceasefire agreements all the way to 2014. In 2014, Fatah and Hamas agreed to a unity deal. This enraged Israel because now they couldn't say that we don't have a partner for peace. With the 2 main factions together, negotiating together, they were going to be exposed. So what did they do? Well, I bet you can guess. Yep, that's right. 2014, in July of 2014, they launched another campaign. They arrested Palestinians all over the West Bank, and then they went into Gaza, killed 2,500 Palestinians, 1,500 of them civilians, 550 children. They injured over 10,000 and destroyed something like 20,000 homes. Just shocking. 51 days and they signed another, guess what, ceasefire agreement. And The Guardian reported that it was, quote unquote, almost identical to what was agreed upon 21 months earlier, and similar to the 2008 agreement. In addition to the cessation of hostilities, Israel agreed to open crossings to allow more humanitarian aid and construction material. But once did any of these ceasefire agreements address the root issue, the siege, the land, air, sea siege. That needs to be lifted. Palestinians must be given the right to self-determine, to live freely. Gaza needs to be reconstructed today, directly with Palestinians. What can't happen is Israel cannot be rewarded for this genocide. In the past, the reconstruction of Gaza has been facilitated by, supervised by, profited by Israel. When Australia hypothetically sent aid, it had to go through an Israeli checkpoint, Israeli ports, Israeli building companies. Let's use an example of some building material, a brick or cement or whatever it might be. That building material that the Gaza needed to repair their home, that an Australian taxpayer may have paid for, had to go through an Israeli contractor. So Israel's GDP, Israel's economy benefits in the reconstruction of Gaza. They profit from the misery they created that was funded by the American taxpayer. It's shameful and it cannot be allowed to happen again. In fact, Israel and the genocideers should be made to pay themselves. Israel should be made to pay itself for the damage it's done in Gaza, as we have till this day. Germany paying reparations for World War II, Germany paying to victims of the Holocaust, so too must Israel be held to account and made to pay for what they have done. The rebuilding of Gaza is going to require an international effort, country-level intervention. Individuals will want to do what they can, and we would urge them to find a way to help Palestine reconstruct in Gaza and the Palestinians. But this is going to require country-level intervention. But what must be clear is that Israel must be held to account, and it must not be allowed to do this again. The next major round of violence after that was 2021. Israel killed another 260 Palestinians, again overwhelmingly civilian. Then they signed another ceasefire. Within a month, Israel's violated it a couple of times. They bombed Khan Yunis. Israel bombed Beit Lahia. No reports of Hamas violations. And that brings us up to October 7 and the period from there. And we know that what's going to happen now is that Israel is craving a space that it enjoyed on October 6, where it could just kill and maim and genocide Palestinians without anybody paying attention. Well, that's our job. Our job is to make sure that Israel never gets to do that again. The world has seen Israel for what it is, has seen Zionism for what it is, has seen what genocide will look like, what hate will look like if it is left unchecked and unrestrained. It's our job to make sure whatever space we can occupy, whatever energy we might have, is to not allow Israel to go back to, quote unquote, being a normal country. It's not a normal country. Whether it be in the Great Return March, where Palestinians marched peacefully in a demonstration that was organised by Palestinian civil society, not by Hamas, not by any of the resistance. The Palestinians marched peacefully to the quote-unquote fence, in fact, cage prison wall is what it should be called. The Palestinians marched there and Israelis shot indiscriminately, killed Palestinian protesters, and we had many snipers boasting of taking out knees using explosive bullets that were meant to create massive injuries and amputations amongst the civilian population. Tens of Palestinians, we know 4 journalists wearing press vests, were assassinated by snipers from an elevated position using the most sophisticated sniper rifles directed at human beings. It's shameful that this has been going on. It's shameful that the West has allowed it to go on. It's shameful that our country continues to not do more. And we're not asking for too much. We're not asking for anything that is extraordinary. What we're asking for is what the country has done for the Ukraine. Palestinians are equally human, equally have a right to live in peace, equally have a right to resist their occupation. And the very least Australia can do is impose targeted sanctions, including freezing assets of Israeli individuals and entities that are involved in the Israeli occupation, the settlement enterprise, the annexation, etc. The Australian government must impose comprehensive arms embargoes. That includes a suspension of all agreements and deals that cover both exports and imports and transfer of arms. That we must cancel anything that might be dual use. We should be suspending all Defence Force cooperation, and we should be reviewing everything that we are doing with Israel, identifying any economic relationship, whatever it might be. And these are obligations imposed upon us as signatories to the International Court of Justice following the July determination of the illegality and inadmissibility of land by force. We need the country, the government, to act fairly, to end the hypocrisy on how it treats Palestinians compared to Ukrainians. We should be banning settlement goods. Nothing should be coming to Australia from the settlements. Nothing should be coming to Australia from Israel. But at the very least, our obligations as signatories to the International Court of Justice, so that we shouldn't be having any settlement goods. There should be no two-way taxation treaties. The concept, the absurdity of our opposition during the week saying that they want to start negotiating a free trade agreement that has got zero positive impact to Australia. Just a further cheapening and a further political point scoring by our alternative Prime Minister, Peter Dutton, who continues to inflame tensions and contribute to the destruction of what quote-unquote was social cohesion. And that social cohesion was very clear what it meant for us. It was, shut up, know your space, don't speak up and don't speak out. That's gone. Palestinians won't ever occupy a space today with a Zionist who says that we don't exist, with a Zionist that says we can't go home, with a Zionist that expects that their right to expel, oppress and continue to punish Palestinians merely for being Palestinian. We're not going to accept that space anymore. And if that means that we're excluded from opportunities, well, we don't believe that they are opportunities. It's time for Palestinians and their right to be addressed. It's time for us to address anti-Palestinian racism and to educate people on what anti-Palestinian racism is and the significant challenge Australian Palestinians and their supporters face in this colony when they speak up and out for Palestine. Make sure you get along to your rally tomorrow, 12 o'clock State Library. From the river to the sea, my friends, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Get out, get loud for Palestine.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.